What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. It is Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, and I have an emergency alert to share with you guys. Right now, it is 2200 Eastern Time here in the United States, and we have some major breaking news coming in from Europe. But before I get into Europe, I want to just show you guys what we have going on tonight. We have U.S. nuclear forces on high alert tonight, and this comes after a U.S. B-52 nuclear bomber flew into the Suwalki Gap earlier this morning, really early this morning, and I covered that in my update earlier today. But let me show you what we have going on right now. 2200 Eastern Time, we have this U.S. nuclear war command and control plane looping just north of San Francisco. This is an E-6 Mercury. These planes are responsible for communicating with our nuclear armed submarines. They have a very long antenna that they spool out the back of the plane, sort of like a deep sea fishing reel. And you see how it's looping like this? When they loop like this, that means they have their antenna spooled out the back, and they're flying in these loops to keep the antenna as vertical as possible so that they can then transmit messages to our submerged nuclear armed submarines. We also have this U.S. Air Force aerial refueler that flew down to the Baja California area. Now, what's interesting is this is the same area where a NOTAM was issued last week for Russian missile impacts. Okay, this giant area here, right where this aerial refueler went, just north of the Guadalupe Island, had a huge NOTAM for missile impacts due to Russian missile tests. So something is going on over here off the coast of the Baja California. I'm going to continue to monitor that for you. We also have a U.S. B-52 nuclear bomber looping over the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas in the Wachita National Forest. This is very concerning to have a B-52 looping like that. And this update was sponsored by My Patriot Supply. Guys, My Patriot Supply has brought back their 25% discount on their 3-month emergency food supply. And to get the discount, you have to use the link preparewithnyprepper.com. And the link is in the description below this video. And this 3-month emergency food supply has a 25-year shelf life with over 2,000 calories per day, all packed inside of 6 rugged water-resistant buckets. Free shipping is included. The normal price is $800. If you use the link, you'll only pay $600 for 3 months of food with free shipping. So use the link preparewithnyprepper.com to get 25% off of the My Patriot Supply 3-month emergency food supply, and the link is in the description below this video. Over the Ozarks this late at night. Now, what's very concerning to me is this presidential Doomsday plane that is now heading back to Offutt Air Base from Washington, D.C., and this Doomsday plane actually flew to Washington, D.C. earlier this afternoon and this evening, almost as if it dropped someone off, and now it's heading back. I have no idea what's going on here, but they did the same thing last night. A Doomsday plane flew from Offutt Air Base to D.C., and then earlier this afternoon, a Doomsday plane went to D.C., and now it's going back to Offutt Air Base. Okay, so very interesting, and this was earlier this evening. You can see the Doomsday plane here heading east to D.C., and then we also had 2 more nuclear war command and control planes in the air. Okay, so nuclear forces here in the U.S. are on high alert. And earlier this morning, we had this B-52 nuclear bomber, guys. These are nuclear bombers. B-52s are part of our nuclear triad. They carry the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missiles, which have a range of up to 2,000 plus miles. and they are armed with the W-80 thermonuclear warhead, which has a blast yield of 200 kilotons, and they can carry 16 of those cruise missiles each with those nuclear warheads on top, okay? And this thing was just looping right here in the Suwalki Gap. So this is clearly a show of force and also practicing a nuclear strike on Kaliningrad, taking out potentially all of the Russian bases in Kaliningrad, all of their air defenses, all of their troop concentrations, all their naval. They have a naval base here, the Baltisk naval base in Kaliningrad. That's part of their Baltic fleet. They have several air defense sites here, thousands and thousands of barracks for troops. So this is huge news, guys. Okay, the U.S. is now flying B-52s into the Suwalki Gap, and I have an official update from the U.S. military about this. So apparently 4 U.S. Air Force B-52 Stratofortress aircraft assigned to the 5th Bomb Wing arrived at the Royal Air Force Base Fairford in the UK on Monday, May the 20th. So that's last Monday. 4 B-52s arrived in Fairford, UK. The unit operates as the 69th Expeditionary Bomb Squadron under the banner of Bomber Task Force Europe 24-3 and takes part in international military exercises, part of which takes place on NATO's eastern flank. As part of their presence, the B-52s will take part in 11 military exercises in Europe, including air support tasks. The mission from the 5th Bomb Wing at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, is the 3rd Bomber Task Force to deploy to Europe this year, following B-1 deployments to Sweden in February, and we actually tracked that. And one of my friends actually lives right next to the base where those B-1s landed, and then also in Spain in March. Okay, so this is the 3rd Bomber Task Force to deploy to Europe so far this year in 2024, and they are now flying into the Suwalki Gap. We had a massive amount of NATO activity over Poland and the Baltics last night, in addition to this B-52. Here we have 2 Apaches that took off from Lithuania and went to Poland, flew through the Suwalki Gap. Here we have probably about half a dozen NATO reconnaissance planes patrolling the Baltic Sea, eastern Poland, northern Poland, Lithuania. Absolutely insane. We have an Italian AWACS plane here patrolling the border of Belarus, a Swedish reconnaissance plane patrolling the border of Belarus and Russia in Poland. Here we have a NATO reconnaissance plane patrolling the central Baltic, and then also a Swedish reconnaissance plane patrolling the central Baltic as well, right off the coast of Kaliningrad. And then here's just a closer shot of the Italian plane. Here's a closer shot of the NATO and Swedish planes in the Baltic Sea. I mean, this is just absolutely insane. And then on top of that, we had 2 German Air Force military cargo planes going to Estonia and Lithuania. Okay, so NATO is reinforcing the Baltics because something huge is about to go down. And then just a few days ago, we had 2 B-52s fly up to Sweden in the central Baltic as well, just south of Stockholm, and they were looping right off the coast of Sweden for a few hours, and then they turned around and came back. So our nuclear forces are on high alert. Russia's nuclear forces are on high alert. They put their tactical nuclear weapons on full combat alert in southern Russia and also in Belarus, which is an indication that they're preparing to potentially use them. And Russia is now claiming that NATO is preparing to attack Russia and are training for nuclear strikes. Near the Russian border, NATO's reconnaissance activities are increasing. The intensity of operational combat training of the alliance's troops is growing, during which scenarios for conducting combat operations against the Russian Federation, including the launch of nuclear strikes on our territory, are being worked out. The head of the border service of the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, said. Okay, so the head of the border service of the FSB said that NATO is preparing for nuclear strikes on Russia. This is huge, okay? And the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, signed a bill into law to suspend the Treaty of Conventional Forces Europe. Okay, so this is huge news, guys. Belarus pulling out of the Conventional Forces Europe Treaty. This was a treaty signed during the end of the Cold War after the fall of the Soviet Union between Russia and Eastern European countries, that they would no longer stockpile a massive amount of equipment and tanks and position all kinds of equipment on their borders with each other. So Poland already pulled out of this treaty. Russia pulled out of this treaty. Now Belarus is pulling out of this treaty. So this is a huge sign that Belarus is preparing for war, potentially with Poland and the Baltics. And Biden authorized another $275 million in assistance for Ukraine today. French President Emmanuel Macron, alongside German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, declared today that Ukraine should be allowed to use EU-provided weapons to neutralize military facilities launching missiles, even if located in Russia. Scholz suggested that Ukraine could also use German weapons or Western weapons to attack targets in Russia if they attack Ukraine. The rule is that this must always be within the framework of international law. Macron made it even more clear, saying they must be allowed to do so. Ukraine should be allowed to strike military bases on Russian territory from which Moscow carries out missile attacks against Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron said today, we should allow them to neutralize military sites where missiles are fired from, where Ukraine is attacked. If we tell them that you are not allowed to target the place from which missiles are fired, we are in fact telling them that we are providing you with weapons, but you cannot defend yourself. So strong words from Emmanuel Macron. And here's actually a video of him. And you can read the subtitles here. Okay, I'm going to play this for you, but you're going to have to read the subtitles because he speaks in French.
Le sol ukrainien, oui, est attaqué, de fait, depuis des bases, et qui sont en Russie. Alors comment on explique aux Ukrainiens qu'il va falloir protéger ces villes, et au fond tout ce qu'on voit en ce moment autour de Kharkiv, si on leur dit vous n'avez pas le droit d'atteindre le point d'où sont tirés les missiles? En fait, on leur dit on vous livre des armes, mais vous ne pouvez pas vous défendre. Donc nous, on reste exactement dans le même cadre. On pense qu'on doit leur permettre de neutraliser les sites militaires d'où sont tirés les missiles, et au fond les sites militaires depuis lesquels l'Ukraine est agressée, mais on ne doit pas permettre de toucher d'autres cibles en Russie, et évidemment des capacités civiles ou d'autres cibles militaires.
So he basically just says that they should be allowed to use weapons to target the facilities and bases that are striking Ukraine, but not civilian targets or other military targets in Russia, just the ones that are being used to strike Ukraine. Here we have the leader of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, reiterating his support for Ukraine using Western weapons to strike targets in Russia. This is the second time he said this, so we're seeing this push by multiple countries now, including the leader of NATO himself, to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons to strike Russian targets inside of Russia. This is a huge escalation. So far, we have the Netherlands, Poland, the Baltic countries, the UK, France, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, the Czech Republic, all saying that they support Ukraine using their weapons to strike Russian targets. But let's listen to the leader of NATO himself.
Made by individual allies. But I have said that the time has come to consider whether it will be right to lift some of the restrictions which have been imposed. Because we see now that, especially in Kharkiv region, the front line and the border line is more or less the same. And of course, if you then cannot attack military targets on Russian territory, then it ties one hand of the Ukrainians on their back and makes it very hard for them to conduct defense, because they are attacked from Russian territory with missiles, with airstrikes, with artillery, and it's hard for them to respond because there are restrictions on some of the weapons they could use. And we have to remember what this is. This is self-defense. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a war of aggression, blatantly violating international law.
So strong words there from the leader of NATO, saying that the restrictions put on Ukraine's use of the weapons is the equivalent of tying one hand behind their back. And Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that NATO is already in direct confrontation with Russia. Putin had some strong words to say about everything going on today. He said Russia is closely monitoring statements about strikes deep into its territory. NATO must be aware of what they are playing with. Everything is going on around the events on the outskirts of Kharkiv. So it was they, NATO countries, that provoked these events in Kharkiv. So he's basically saying that the attacks on Belgorod, which were apparently planned by NATO, according to Putin, forced Russia to create this sanitary zone in Kharkiv, which is what they're trying to do. And constant escalation will lead to serious consequences. That's what he said directly. Okay. The possible entry of Western troops into Ukraine is an escalation and another step towards conflict in Europe and global conflict. And he also said if a contingent of European countries comes along with the Poles, others will leave, but the Poles will never. So he's saying that Polish troops would stay in Ukraine once they enter Ukraine, basically saying that Poland would occupy parts of Ukraine, which is just crazy. And NATO instructors are operating under the guise of mercenaries. Okay, so strong words there from Putin. Constant escalation will lead to serious consequences. The possible entry of Western troops into Ukraine is an escalation and another step towards conflict in Europe and global conflict. So you see how things are escalating, guys. There's a push now for Western weapons to be used on Russian targets in Russian territory. And then there's a push to put Western troops in Ukraine as well. Okay, so this is very, very serious. It's getting very serious, guys. The Polish foreign minister said Poland would not rule out sending troops to Ukraine. Questioned on the prospect of sending Polish troops to fight in Ukraine, Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said Warsaw should not rule out any option. Let Putin guess what we are going to do, he said in an interview with 3 European newspapers. This was not the first time Sikorski has raised the possibility of sending NATO soldiers into Ukraine. In March, he described the prospect as not unthinkable, and he said, I appreciate French President Emmanuel Macron's initiative because it's about making Putin afraid, not us being afraid of Putin. So strong words from the Polish foreign minister. And Poland confirmed that they will be building massive fortifications in the eastern part of the country known as the East Shield Program, which will cover a border section of almost 700 kilometers, of which between 400 to 500 kilometers will include the development of various types of fortification infrastructure of varying advancement. The main reason why we are implementing this program and consequently the military operation is to increase the state's resilience as well as deterrence and preparation for defense of the border region. That's what the Polish military said about this. Okay, so hundreds of miles of border being fortified in Poland. I spoke about this a few weeks back. The Polish prime minister said that they were going to spend $2.5 billion on their security building fortifications along their border with Belarus. This is the equivalent of $2.5 billion. Okay, this is Polish money. This is not American money that's going towards these fortifications. Okay, it's just the equivalent of $2.5 billion. So it's a massive amount of money that Poland is spending on these fortifications. Okay, and Russian news is claiming that Ukraine is asking for gas masks and antidotes to chemical weapons in large quantities because Ukraine is about to use chemical weapons on Russian forces. So, this could be a sign that Russia is preparing to use chemical weapons if they're going to start blaming Ukraine and creating these conspiracies that Ukraine is planning to do it. Maybe they are the ones that are actually planning to do it. And Zelensky signed a bilateral security agreement today with Belgium as well as with Portugal. He visited both countries. Belgium pledged $1 billion in assistance and 30 F 16s, while Portugal promised 10 years of assistance. And now 12 countries have signed bilateral agreements with Ukraine. NATO will create a permanent structure at the summit this year to organize arms supplies to Ukraine and their financing, Jens Stoltenberg said, the leader of NATO. So at this year's NATO summit, they're going to create some kind of a permanent way of funding Ukraine's security, okay? And in Belgorod in Russia, apparently Ukraine attacked a convoy of Russian military equipment in Koroche, and apparently the convoy caught fire. You can see this video here of this massive plume of smoke in the Belgorod region. Ukrainian drones striking a convoy of Russian vehicles, military vehicles. And exercise Northern Forest 24 kicked off in Finland with the U.S. Army's famous 10th Mountain Division conducting red team, blue team exercises with their Finnish counterparts. So that is huge news. And the U.S. will equip Taiwan with the most advanced weapons, according to the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, Michael McCaul. He said all democracies must stand together against aggression and tyranny, whether it's Putin in Russia, the Ayatollah in Iran, or Chairman Xi next door to us in China. An unholy alliance is eroding peace around the world. Not since World War II have we seen such blatant violence and naked aggression. So huge statement there from Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, saying that the U.S. will equip Taiwan with the most advanced weapons. The South Korean armed forces have detected over 90 balloons that have now entered the airspace of South Korea from the territory of North Korea. Several of the balloons have already landed near the DMZ, but well over half are still airborne. The balloons are believed to be possibly carrying propaganda against South Korea. So, very interesting. And Kosovo has now officially become an associate member of NATO. This was voted on earlier today in the NATO Parliament. And what you're looking at here is some video footage of hundreds of Bradley fighting vehicles staging up somewhere in Europe, potentially going to Ukraine. I don't know exactly where this video was taken, but it does appear that it's either going to Ukraine or it's going into the Baltics. Okay, you can see they're all painted green. So, very interesting. And an F 35 fighter jet crashed during a takeoff in New Mexico. The pilot is in serious condition after ejecting, so he did survive. And Spain and Ireland officially recognized Palestine as a country, and Ireland hoisted the Palestinian flag outside their parliament building in Dublin. So, very crazy, guys. Check this out. Okay, this is in Dublin. You can see the Palestinian flag flying outside the parliament in Dublin, Ireland. Absolutely insane. And the EU is going to consider sanctions against Israel over their operation in Gaza. Apparently, Russia supplied Hamas with intelligence on the Israeli army. Nikki Haley said in an interview with the Israel Hayom, and the Houthis struck potentially several ships with missiles earlier today off the coast of Yemen. And CBS News is reporting that the U.S. Secret Service has reportedly met with New York jail officials to discuss preparations for former President Donald Trump to be taken into custody and placed behind bars. Wow. So things are really getting crazy, guys. We have to keep an eye on Eastern Europe. I think we're going to see all these fronts kick off at the same time. Putin has put his tactical nuclear weapons on high alert in Russia and in Belarus. We have China doing those massive drills around Taiwan a few days ago. We have intelligence information coming out that North Korea is going to do some kind of a serious provocation before the U.S. elections. We have Russian and Belarusian forces building up on the border of the Baltic countries. We have Poland building massive fortifications along their border with Belarus and Russia. So things are really escalating, guys. And then, of course, we have the situation in Ukraine and then also in the Middle East with Israel. So I'm going to continue to monitor everything, and I will be back tomorrow with more breaking news. So make sure you're subscribed. Hit the bell icon down below so you get notified when I post these updates. Also, check out my Telegram and Twitter. I post all my updates there. So if you follow me on Twitter and Telegram, you'll never miss an update. And until tomorrow, take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps: prepare, practice, and persevere. Attention hand loaders, check out Cutting Edge Bullets for some of the best bullets in the industry. They also sell loaded ammo now, and I'm partnering with them to give you a 20% discount. And to get the discount, all you got to do is use the promo code NYPrepper to get 20% off your entire order. And Cutting Edge Bullets makes the best bullets for bear defense and for big bore rifles, big bore handguns. They also make some really, really good bullets for long range enthusiasts, very high BC bullets that are turned on a lathe. So check them out, cuttingedgebullets.com. Use the promo code NYPrepper to get 20% off. I've done a lot of testing with their big bore bear defense bullets and solids, and I can tell you that they have the best solids in the business. So I'm going to leave a link to their website and the promo code in the description below this video, but it's cuttingedgebullets.com, promo code NYPrepper to get 20% off of your entire order, and check out some of their new loaded ammo if you're not a hand loader.